Good evening and welcome again to Seaside Chats number 2 for 2016. We are very pleased to be here at Sea Scout Base Galveston. It has proven to be a beautiful site at sunset. For those of you who came early, they snuck open the doors and got people up to the 6th floor to take a really good peek at the sunset. So just a little note for next week. Also, before I forget, next week our talk is going to be about the sanctuary and what we've been up to lately in the forms of looking at sanctuary expansion, partnerships with Cuba, and a few other things. And for those of you who are here, we haven't advertised this, but we are going to planning to have our research vessel here out at the dock. So after the presentation, you all can go down and tour our research vessel, Manta. So we didn't put it on the schedule intentionally because if we have a big fog socks in that day, then we're not going to be able to do it. But our plan is to have perfect weather like today and like last Wednesday, get the Manta over here and have you all out there for a visit on board our research vessel at the end of the presentation. So that's a bonus for those of you who will be here in person. What some of you may not realize is we are also online right now. So people are hearing us live out on the web, including somebody named Rachel Burns as far away as Omaha, Nebraska. So that's a little shout out to Rachel and her students out there in Omaha. There are people from Iowa last week and several other places. So we are reaching out beyond Galveston tonight, out into the internet world. And this is our first year of doing these live webinars along with the Seaside Chats. Seaside Chats are brought to you by Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary. That's who I work for. My name is Kelly Drennan. I'm an education and outreach specialist with the sanctuary and the host of these chats every year. And for the first time, not speaking at one of them. I'll be running the webinars this year. So we welcome you. And the topic tonight is going to be why whales and dolphins strand. And our speaker tonight is Ms. Heidi Whitehead with the Texas Marine Mammal Stranding Network. They are not a part of NOAA, like the sanctuary is, but they are supported by NOAA, and their facilities are over at the NOAA location here in Galveston. And without further ado, hand it over to Heidi.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks, everybody, for coming out this evening to talk about whales and dolphins. We appreciate your interest, and hopefully I'll give you guys a lot of good information to take away tonight, and we'll have time for questions at the end as well. So be thinking about those, and I'll work through this information and hopefully give you a lot to think about. So first of all, we'll start off talking about the Marine Mammal Protection Act. One thing that we find is that a lot of members of the public that we encounter don't realize that whales and dolphins, marine mammals, are protected species. So they're protected under this act of 1972, and that prohibits the take of all marine mammal species, which take is defined as to harass, hunt, capture, or kill. And that also applies to dead marine mammals. So if you see a deceased marine mammal on the beach, this take would also apply to those dead marine mammals and the taking of those whale or dolphin parts. So that's something that, as beachcombers, I know a lot of you may come across those things. That's something that you would just want to report, and you can potentially keep some of those parts, but they would just need to be properly identified and make sure that those things get in the database. Like Kelly mentioned, the Texas Marine Mammal Stranding Network, we're the only authorized stranding agreement holder in Texas. So because these animals are under federal protection, then you have to have a permit to be able to recover stranded dolphins and whales. And so the Texas Marine Mammal Stranding Network is that stranding agreement holder for the state of Texas. And as Kelly mentioned, we're a separate nonprofit organization. We do work under a NOAA permit, but we're supported by donations, grants, private funding, and that's primarily how we do all of our work. We're a large volunteer-based organization with very few staff. So all of the work that you see that we're going to talk about today is primarily supported by volunteers, and it's something that you can get involved in as well if you're not already. So as far as the stranding network goes, we do a lot of different activities. We stay pretty busy. Our primary goal is to respond to marine mammal stranding as they wash ashore on the beach. If they are alive, then we aim to provide care for them if possible. We perform necropsies or animal autopsies on dead dolphins and whales that wash in and collect tissues that a lot of grad students and other students can use for studies. We do a lot of research related to marine mammals. And then we also maintain a database and tissue archive for many, many years. So we've been in existence since 1980. So that's a great deal of information and data that we've been gathering just from the Texas coast on whales and dolphins. And then we aim to educate the public too, because there there's so many things that we'll see a little bit later on in the presentation related to whales and dolphins and their strandings and human interaction. So educating the public is an important part of what we do. So just to start out with, so that you guys are a little more familiar with some of the animals that we see, a lot of people know the bottlenose dolphin, and that's our most common species to strand. But we also commonly see these pygmy and dwarf sperm whales, melon-headed whales, Stenella species like the spinner dolphin, and then more recently we've had manatees making their way over into Galveston. So some of you might have seen reports of manatees. We're trying to, as the Stranding Network develops a database to keep those manatee sightings so that we can determine where those manatees are coming from. And we've seen some of the manatees that are here on the Texas coast in the winter are often becoming cold stressed, and they've required us to intervene and do captures of them to take them back to their native Florida waters where it's warmer so that they can survive. So that's something that you might see, and we could really use the help in having those manatee sightings reported to us so that we can maintain that database and track those events. We also have large whales. As most of you know, we had one recently here in Galveston, which we'll get to, the Sei whale. And so we have the sperm whales, which are our most common species, which might surprise you to strand on the Texas coast. We also have whales like the Cuvier's beaked whale up in the top right-hand corner there. And then we've had several fin whales wash ashore recently, like the one down in the lower right-hand corner. The last one that we had was on Matagorda Island. We've had some a little further south down in Mustang Island wash in. So periodically we will get a large whale, but definitely not as common as the bottlenose dolphin strandings that we respond to. So we have a huge coastline to cover. How do we cover that? And how do we keep track of all of the dolphins and whales that are stranding? Well, a lot of people are surprised about these numbers that we receive every year, and we'll go through that in a couple slides later. But this is how we cover it. We have it divided up into a number of different regions. We've got 6 regions along the Texas coast. They're color-coded there. And we have coordinators within each of those regions that have a volunteer team of responders that have been trained. And we have a centralized reporting number, which is 1-800-9-MAMMAL, that we encourage the public to report all marine mammal strandings to, whether they're dead or alive. And in which case, those coordinators will be contacted in that specific region of the stranding, and they'll be able to send a response team out, whether it's dead or alive. We'd like to know about it. When it comes to live animals, we have a rehabilitation center right here in Galveston. A lot of you guys may not have been aware that we have a rehab center here in Galveston, and it's one of a kind. There really has never been another rehabilitation center at a NOAA facility before, so we're really excited to have that. And then in Corpus Christi, we also make use of the Texas State Aquarium Sea Lab facility. They allow us to conduct rehabilitation of live dolphins at their facility as well. So that at any point, if a live dolphin strands, we have somewhere pretty close to be able to transport them to, depending on where they stranded along that coastline. So when it comes to rehabilitation, most of what we see are live stranded dolphins that come on the beach. When they are alive, the main thing, biggest message we try to get out there is not to push them back out into the wild. And that's because those dolphins are typically there for a reason. They strand as a last resort more than likely. And so there are a number of different reasons that dolphins strand, which we'll go into. But that's why we ask folks not to push them back, because 9 times out of 10, they'll just re-strand further down the shore. And it's just a lot of energy and exhaustion that puts them through to go through the stranding process again. And so it's important for them, for us to get to them sooner, and for them to be reported sooner. When a live dolphin does strand, we aim to respond and take it to our facility if it's possible and if resources are available to be able to assess it for further rehabilitation. We also recover dead or deceased marine animals. So this is probably more than likely most of what you would come across on the beach here in Galveston or anywhere along the Texas coast. You'd be more likely to find a dead marine mammal that washes in. And it's very important to us. No matter the stage of decomposition, there can still be a lot of good information that we can get from those dead strandings. Some of those are things like life history. How old are these dolphins that are stranding? Genetics. What stock do these dolphins or whales come from? And so all of those things can be very important and can be gained from just maybe one tooth or one tiny little piece of skin. And so never doubt how important these animals are to us, whether they're dead or alive. We aim to get out to them. So when do marine mammals strand? Well, we're really right in the middle of our peak, what we refer to as our stranding season, which is January through March. That's when we see our highest number of strandings coming in. You might ask, why is that? Well, that's an age-old question that we've really been working on, like I said, since 1980 when we started. We've always seen this peak in the winter months. It's coming off of calving season, so we see a lot of very young neonates, stillbirths that are coming in. So you might see the very small dolphins that have umbilical cords still attached. And then we also see a lot of very old, large animals that are washing in with pneumonia and things like that. When the water temperatures start to drop, we believe that they're just not able to maintain their health out of the wild and start coming in off those winter months. But we do receive strandings year-round. Like I said, our peak is just in the springtime typically. And then also in hurricane and tropical storm season, we'll actually see a number of animals that could potentially be washed out in storm surges. And so we see animals that have been washed as much as 2 to 4 miles inland in a storm surge, and they're trapped in flooded fields, flooded ditches, things like that, where we will be able to get out to them, hopefully, if they're reported in time, recover them and release them back out into the wild. So we never know what we're going to encounter, especially throughout the year. We have lots of different waves of stranding events, but it's something that we can pretty much count on being busy at the beginning of the year. So here's some stranding statistics just to kind of show you along the Texas coast which regions receive the most strandings. And some of this, in part, we believe is due to the remote nature of some of these beaches, like in the Corpus Christi area, Padre Island National Seashore is sometimes difficult to navigate. Galveston beaches, primarily most of our dolphins are being found in Crystal Beach, Oliver area, the west end of the island. So places that people are able to drive onto, they're frequenting there, they're beachcombing. And so we think that these high numbers may reflect in part just the fact that the public is out there and able to find them and report them. The Port Aransas is also our second highest number, and they have a large population that's also primarily on that Mustang Island area. Is where we're finding most of those dolphins. And this just gives you a general idea of the condition code or the state of decomposition that these animals are in. So a code 1 would be a live animal. So we have received 10 live animals in 2015. And then code 2 would be dead less than 24 hours. And then as you progress on to 3, 4, 5, and 6, those are becoming more decomposed or greater decomposition. So you can see that the majority of the dolphins that we receive, by the time we receive the reports or they are found on surveys, they're in that code 4, that advanced stage of decomposition. But like I mentioned, we can still get some good data out of them, but it's often difficult to determine a specific cause of stranding if we're not able to do things like histopathology on them. But it can be difficult to determine exactly why those dolphins came ashore. This just gives you an idea on how many bottlenose dolphins that we see versus the other species. This was 2015, where we had the sei whale, the spinner dolphin, and a pygmy sperm whale, or the kogia, and versus our 96% of terciops are our bottlenose dolphins. So this is really is a good picture of a typical year for us as far as the number of bottlenose dolphins that are dying off compared to the other species. And that's really reflecting the fact that bottlenose dolphins are known to be coastal, whereas these other species are known to be offshore species and they don't reside here along the coast. So it's not common for them to be here. And so we wouldn't expect to find high numbers of deceased animals along the coast here. So we'll go into talking a little bit more about each of these issues. These are some of the things that We really find in our investigations as far as things that lead to marine mammals to strand, dolphins and whales to strand. The first of those is the feeding of wild dolphins. So a lot of people aren't aware that feeding wild dolphins is illegal. It does, go against that Marine Mammal Protection Act. It is considered a take. But really the main thing is that these dolphins are smart and they learn incredibly fast where they can get a free meal. So we have some hot spots along the Texas coast, some areas down south, like the Pompano fishing pier, where the dolphins really learn, not necessarily that people are feeding them, but when the fishermen are fishing, they're throwing back fish. And so the dolphins are looking at that as a free meal. And so they're frequenting those piers and then they're getting entangled in fishing line. And we've had a number of entanglements that have occurred there. So just something to be mindful of, and we'll go into kind of some action items in a little bit on things we try to educate people to prevent those things from happening. But we've seen over in Florida and many areas where dolphins in these areas really start to become like beggar animals. They quit trying to be out hunting on their own. And it really leads to their detriment in the end and leads to that entanglement. And this is just an example of some of the entanglements that we have seen over the years. The primary culprits are crab pots. I know they're having an abandoned crab pot removal this weekend, so that's really helpful because a lot of the dolphins are curious about crab pots and they'll start spinning around them to investigate them. And before you know it, they're tied up like this one in the top right corner. So it's important to not have things like that out in the ocean that's unattended and that they're able to get into trouble with. We see gear, fishing lures in stomachs often. So it's something that they may be feeding off of somebody's line and take the fish off and get the lure with it. So again, that's telling us that they're kind of hanging out and frequenting these fishing piers more often. In this bottom right-hand corner is a whole bunch of gear that we actually pulled off of a very young calf at that Pompano fishing pier. And he had somehow or another gathered all of this gear on his body and was dragging it. And he was becoming very skinny because of the drag on his body. So that caused him to strand, and we were able to disentangle him. This is another example of an entangled dolphin. This one was named Mohawk. This one was actually a repeat offender that had come into an interaction with the boat where it had basically shaved off the top of its melon. And then it was frequenting again. It didn't learn its lesson, so to speak, and was back around fishing piers. And it was identified by a dolphin watch boat in which they were able to monitor the dolphin. We noticed in one of the pictures that they submitted that the dolphin actually had, as a young baby, had the line coming out of the corner of its mouth. So we typically try not to intervene for things like captures and disentanglements if a young baby is with a mom. It can be potentially dangerous to people, but also to the calf with the mom. So when we saw this, we knew that we needed to intervene if at all possible. And so we did that. We were able to capture the young calf and remove all of the gear. You can see the gear had really been wrapped around the entire body. It was starting to wrap around its appendages, around its dorsal fin. And we were really fortunate that the line that was going into the mouth, we thought maybe it had swallowed a hook, but it actually was just bridled through the mouth. So we were able to cut it and release the animal right away with mom. So that was one that ended well, but they don't always end so well. And we do see entanglement as an issue. It's becoming more prevalent along the Texas coast as well. So we're just, really trying to help out with educating people on proper disposal of fishing gear, but also other foreign objects. You can see down below there's an automotive belt that got caught on this young dolphin's neck, and as he grew, that automotive belt was kind of shrinking in on him. So they were able to capture this one, cut it off, and remove him, and he's been doing well after post-monitoring. We've also had reports of actually a Speedo bathing suits that got caught around the dolphin's neck. So you never know what they're going to get into. Just making sure that things are in the right places as far as foreign objects and trash is concerned. These are some dolphin-friendly fishing tips that I talked about. These are some signs that we had posted at the Capano Bay fishing piers to really try and educate the fishermen about the fact that we know that dolphins can be pesky in a sense, that they just keep coming back to take fish off the lines. But these are some things that can help the dolphins out, as well as helping the fishermen too, by keeping the dolphins away from those piers. So we have some of these available at the back table if you're interested. We've got some of those pamphlets that include some of these simple tips that you can use while you're fishing. The vessel and human interaction is another one that we've seen. And really, it's just behavior modification of dolphins. It's getting them acclimated to boats. It's getting them acclimated to people where they lose that natural wariness of approaching those things that could potentially be dangerous to them. And so it's really something that we've seen accumulates over time with certain populations that are exposed, like animals that are, say, in the ship channel that are exposed to vessel traffic over and over again with viewing. Those animals are more likely to become injured by boats because they lose that natural wariness about them. And there are some viewing codes of conduct that NOAA has set forth for dolphins. A lot of people aren't aware that those even exist, but there are really some simple tips about some things that you can do when you're out on your vessel that can prevent some of these injuries that we're seeing from some of the stranded dolphins that are washing in. So things that are simple, like limiting your viewing time. You may be only viewing them for 30, 45 minutes, but what about the boat that comes along after you? So just thinking about those cumulative effects is really important. And then when we get to disease and illness, this is probably the primary causes that we see of strandings. We had some mass die-offs in 2007, 2008, and 2012 that we addressed right here in Galveston. It included Galveston, Brazoria counties, where we had over 100 bottlenose dolphins wash in a very short period of time. Just a couple of weeks for each event that we were seeing all these dolphins wash in. So we were aiming to get out to them, to sample them. You can see down below, we had a lot of very young ones coming in, the older ones again, but we were trying to get out to them as quickly as we could and sample them out. Some things that we did potentially learn is that there were some biotoxin events that were occurring simultaneously, so these algal blooms that were happening that could potentially affect the food source that the animals were feeding on, and as a result, can cause death in dolphins. We haven't.
Can you speak up a little? They're having a hard time online.
Sure.
Thanks.
We haven't determined that was the exact cause of all of these events, but we do know that those algal blooms were playing a simultaneous role where these die-offs were occurring. Another thing that we have seen is brucellosis that's been more prevalent. That's kind of coming over the veterinary world of marine mammals. It's something that we always tested for, but not something that we really knew much about or what it meant when we were finding brucellosis in marine mammals. But what we have found is that it is potentially deadly to them. It's something that many of you may have heard of it in cattle. And so it has a different effect on marine mammals, and it can cause them to die off in mass quantities. And so it's much like morbillivirus, where one or two animals gets it, then it can cause widespread die-offs within populations. And so it's something that we're always looking for. It's not necessarily something that we can cure if we find it if the dolphin washes in, but it can be found through blood samples. We can also find it through PCR or a chain culture of an animal. So that's something that we routinely do with dolphins and whales that come in that have been dead a shorter period of time. They're not as decomposed so that we can get the proper samples to do this testing. It's difficult to detect some of those diseases within the animals that are more decomposed. Meningitis is also prevalent, and that is typically a result of some type of virus or parasite that these dolphins are coming in with. So many times a parasite will invade the body, and it's not uncommon for, say, a lungworm or some type of parasite to be present in an organ without it causing an issue. But it's when those parasites begin to multiply, and then they can also start migrating into other areas of the body, like migrating to the ear bones and eating away at the ear bones, which causes disorientation of an animal, where they're not able to navigate properly, which might bring them to the beach alone. But once those parasites have eaten through that ear bone, not only are they not able to navigate, but then they have access to the brain. And so we see a lot of dolphins that strand alive that end up having brain lesions. And it's usually a result of parasites that have come and burrowed within the brain. And so we have many years of experience with rehabilitation, where we can now really start to see symptoms that animals are displaying when they come into rehab and when they are alive, showing neurological conditions that we can start to pair with these types of brain lesions, because the brain lesions aren't something that we can necessarily test for. At this point, it's really something that we have to rely a lot on what we're seeing and the symptoms that the dolphins are displaying, because there's not a blood test, so to speak, for brain lesions or any type of culture that you can necessarily do to determine if there's been damage to the brain. So parasites are definitely something that we see commonly. It's just really trying to tease out whether those parasites are present in a large enough quantity, or if they're in places that could cause a real issue and cause the death of an animal. Fungal infections are something else that we see. They get it, from the air, from the water. This fungus is present everywhere. So there are many different types of fungus that we have treated. Most of the time, the animals that have come in that have resulted from fungal infections, it's present within the lungs, and it begins to cause hard consolidations or lesions within the lungs that we're typically able to pick up on radiographs and different diagnoses that we do when they come into rehabilitation with us. But it's not just the live ones that we're looking for those things on. It's, of course, the dead ones that we're performing these necropsies on, or these animal autopsies. If they are dead less than 24 hours, we also have a research lab where we bring them back to at our facility. That's pictured there on the right-hand side, where we have been trained by pathologists to go through and do very lengthy and extensive necropsies. So a necropsy on an animal like a bottlenose dolphin might take 7 to 8 hours. We're very extensive in the samples that we're collecting. And even if it's not something that we may be running right away for an analysis, we still collect that data in case maybe down the road we start to see a trend with strandings, and we'll have those samples to be able to go back and that. So really the most important thing to us when it comes to learning the cause of dolphin deaths is to get the reports as quickly as possible. And that's through our 800 Mammal number. We answer that 24 hours a day, and dead or alive, we want to know about where these animals are stranding. And then familiarizing, of course, you guys with stranding occurrences, the fact that these things happen, why they happen, and how you can help. We can talk about some recent events. Most of you are, again, familiar with the fact that the sei whale stranded back in September. And then we also have a current patient in rehabilitation that we'll talk about as well. As far as the sei whale response, for those of you that are not familiar with the sei whale, it is one of the great oracles. And so this baleen whale is very rare along our Texas coast. In fact, the sei whale is only the second sei whale that was known to strand along the Texas coast in the 36 years that we've been collecting data. They do have a worldwide range, but their distribution is really unpredictable. So they're kind of scattered all over. Scientists haven't really been able to find a very specific pattern of their distribution. So they are found in the Gulf of Mexico. They can be found in the Gulf, but they're definitely an offshore species and not to be found coastal. It is an endangered species. It's classified by the National Marine Fisheries Service. And some of the characteristics that we were looking for, I don't know if those of you that were either out there with the whale or have heard about kind of how things went with the whale event, but initially the whale was in pretty heavy surf. And so we weren't really sure. We knew it was a baleen whale, but we really weren't sure of the species. And the reason that is because there are some very fine characteristics that can distinguish one baleen whale from another, say a fin whale or a Brutus whale from a sei whale. And some of those things are things like the ventral pleats. How many ventral pleats are there? The sei whale has 30 to 60 ventral pleats. That's not something we could very well count while it's rolling in the surf. The same thing with the rostral ridge. So this ridge that runs right along the head. The sei whale has just one ridge along the head, whereas some of the other species have multiple ridges. So those are some of the things that we were really trying to identify what the species of the whale is. One thing that really threw us off in this particular whale, as you can see the dorsal fin down at the bottom is kind of an upside down shot of the fin. But usually they have a really tall, falcate, kind of curved dorsal fin. And this particular one had more of a triangular fin. But what we learned once it came ashore was that the fin had actually been chopped at some point. And so that was kind of throwing us off a little bit, that it didn't have the identifying dorsal fin that this particular species normally has. But once we were able to tow the whale ashore, we were able to get a closer look and determine species at that point in which we collected samples for genetics to confirm that. So this whale stranded alive, and you know, again, it was rolling in the surf. There wasn't a whole lot that we could do as far as response goes. So when the whale washed ashore, really all that we could do was get out there, try and determine what we were going to do when it calmed down enough and the conditions calmed down enough so that it was safe for us to approach. So that's probably the biggest question that we had was, why couldn't the whale be saved? And of course, all of us at the Texas Marine Mammal Stranding Network, it pains us to see a live animal suffering in any way. But our main goal, obviously, is first human safety. And when you're dealing with a whale this size and the power of the surf and rolling, it's just not safe for us to even approach the whale at that point. So even though it was very difficult for us to stand back and not be able to get out there and help it if we could, it was what was safe to do. Secondly, even if we could have approached it, there wasn't a whole lot we could do for it. It's too large to be transported anywhere for rehabilitation. And a lot of people were saying, well, why didn't you just push it back out? For one, logistically, that is a very difficult task to just push a whale back out. It would require a lot of towing, and more than likely it would just wash back in a different position. And what would we have put the whale through trying to tow it out? Secondly, looking at the body condition of this whale, even in the surf, as you can see in the picture, it's extremely skinny. The muscles are very concave. All of that should be nice and rounded. Even though they're a sleek species, those muscles should just be rounded, but you can actually see the scapula or the shoulder blade kind of protruding there. So we knew that this whale was in very poor body condition and was more than likely ill. And pairing that with our knowledge of the fact that whales like this just don't inhabit the coastal waters of Texas, we knew that this whale was a long way off and more than likely was sick, and that's what brought it to the beach. So that's why we made the decisions that we did. We were preparing everything that we could to try and euthanize the whale if it did come ashore so that its suffering was not prolonged. We do have specialized equipment to be able to do that, where it's humane for the whale, but thankfully it did not get to that point, and the whale was able to pass on its own there in the surf. Why was the public not allowed to touch the whale? We've been asked that. You can see there was a lot of folks out there, a lot of interest, which is great to see so much interest in marine mammals. But one of the reasons was human health, like we just talked about. They carry diseases that are zoonotic that can be passed from them to us. So it's really important that we didn't have young kids and maybe folks with compromised immune systems around the whale. Secondly, it really could have been a dangerous thing, especially if the whale's tail or something powerful decide to come up. It can be potentially dangerous. And so that's why we were not even having our staff approach it when it was in the water alive. Let's see, as far as a lot of people were asking, why did you cut the whale open on the beach? We had to do it at the beach because the animal could not be moved due to the sheer size off of the beach. There just wasn't a good location to take it. But we wanted to make sure that this was not a waste for science and that we were able to get all of the data that we could from this whale to try and determine why it's stranded, if possible, to help other whales that may come in the future so that maybe we can start to see a trend if more whales were to wash in. So that's definitely something that we didn't want to waste. There's still very little known about this particular species of whale. And so we got a lot of good information that we wouldn't have had. And why did we decide to bury the whale? We did bury the whale along with the park board, right along the beach there. And really that's just a means of resources and logistics. That's all we had available to us. There's not a good location where you can take a whale off to necessarily, and just the sheer transport of an animal this size would be near impossible. So the park board, Galveston Park Board stepped up. It did amazing at pulling this whale up, burying it where they could, and then they have really daily taking on the responsibility of going out and covering the whale and packing it down. So they've really done an excellent job. We can't thank them enough for all of their help, and really just everyone who was out to handle that response. It's a huge effort. This is a recent patient that we have. It's a bottlenose dolphin. His name is Zip. He's stranded down in Boca Chica Beach near South Padre Island. There was a really strong red tide presence. So that's one of those algal blooms that we talked about. The air was really bad at that time. And we saw that this particular bottlenose dolphin, when he was stranded, was very young. He was a baby. And so there were other dolphins in the area. Folks did try to push him back out, and he kept restranding. At that point, we took him to the Coastal Studies Lab, which is down there for initial stabilization. That's the picture that you see there. He was swimming on his own, but he was found to have some respiratory issues that he was dealing with. And so we made the decision at that point, because we didn't have seawater free of this red tide in either Corpus or in South Padre to take him to rehabilitation. So we brought him all the way up here to Galveston for rehabilitation. That was in September. And he's still with us in rehab. He was a very young calf. He didn't have any teeth that had erupted yet. He was still nursing. So he's a baby, and we, tubed him a special milk formula that's been analyzed from mother's milk, and we were able to develop that and feed that to him. And we eventually weaned him, and now he's eating whole fish on his own. He was deemed non-releasable by National Marine Fisheries. So what that means is that he is not deemed fit for release to go back into the wild based on his age and the fact that he was not with his mother long enough to learn the things that he needed to know to be able to survive in the wild. Then he will not be able to go back out into the wild. So that decision was made for his benefit. And at that point, we began more enrichment with him, more in-person kind of interaction instead of trying to keep him wild like we typically do. We really started interacting with him more, and he's really become acclimated to us at this point. So this is him now. He can be a little bit silly, and it's a lot of fun, but he needs a dolphin mom very soon. So he's up for placement right now. We treated him for respiratory condition. We also treated him for gastric symptoms and continue to treat him for gastric symptoms. And those are things that we commonly find in rehabilitation. You'll see in the top left, we're doing an ultrasound, so diagnostics are things that we commonly do when they're in rehab to try and determine why they stranded, and routine blood work. We just did a blood draw on him today, and so that's something that we continue to do the entire time that they're in rehabilitation with us. You'll see in the bottom left, that's him. We put some live mullet and some different live fish in just to kind of see how he handled himself. And He had a little fun with the chase, but he was mostly just concerned about playing with the fish and had no idea how to consume them or swallow them at that point. So we helped him out a little bit with that. So that's it for my presentation, but we can open it up for questions if that's okay with you, Kelly.
Yes, it's good. I have one already online.
Okay.
Hurricane Ike had a large storm surge. Were there many inland strandings reported after that 2008 storm?
We did have a couple of inland strandings after Hurricane Ike that occurred. One of those took place down on Surfside. We actually had a mom calf pygmy sperm whale that stranded and was in a ravine, basically on the beach, a washout that was inland. And then we had a bottlenose dolphin that also washed in a hunting lease just after Hurricane Ike. And some young brothers found it in their hunting lease, and we were able to take a shallow draft boat and get them out. Yes?
The whale that stranded in September, what was the reason? Was it ever determined?
We haven't determined the cause of the stranding. We did take some samples for toxicology. We did histopathology. We're looking for brevetoxins or algal blooms, biotoxins. We did get some cultures back that were negative for some of the things that we were looking for. So it's going to be an ongoing investigation into that whale, and it's something that really takes time. I think we all want answers really quickly when it comes to, why those animals died. I know we do in the lab, and we do all this work, and we want to know exactly why this animal came in. But sometimes it's putting a bunch of pieces together as the different analysis come back from the lab. So we don't have an answer as to why that whale stranded at this time.
If you get die-off that due to something like Brucella or other bacterial infestations, is there anything you can do to go further than just let it run its course?
It can be difficult.
Can you repeat the question so they can hear online?
Yes, she was wondering if we get a die-off from Brucella or morbillivirus, is there anything we can do to mitigate that rather than just having it run its course? It's very difficult. Once it starts spreading across populations, it's difficult to stop that. And so sometimes the best thing that we can do is continue to monitor it for human health reasons, but then also we can really start to see kind of what the impact would be to the population. So we might shift our gear to try to determine exactly how many are dying off from that and what the effect was to the population. So it can be difficult to stop that process from happening. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that they have live dolphins, stream, and that they have perhaps the rest all the way brain. Are those savable? Can you rehabilitate them? And if so, how?
Okay, so he was asking if whales or dolphins that strand alive that have brain lesions can be helped. It's very difficult to save an animal with a brain lesion. It depends on how severe it is. Really what starts happening is once that brain lesion is present, whatever bacteria or parasite that has caused that lesion can also potentially cause swelling of the brain. And so if the swelling starts occurring and fluid starts to accumulate on the brain, then that's going to start impairing the dolphin's function. But it can be a situation where maybe it was just, a very acute case, something that we caught early, we can begin treating it with antibiotics, and it keeps that swelling and that fluid down where they can function and go on. They might have some very slight neurological impairment where they couldn't be released back out into the wild, but it may be something that we could treat. But more often than not, by the time they make it to the beach, it's too far advanced for us to be able to help them.
Heidi, what was the reason, what were the factors that deemed the dolphin unreleasable?
The factors that deem the current dolphin that we have unreleasable was the fact that it was a dependent calf, so it's not able to feed on its own. It did not have the hunting skills or the survival skills that it needed to be able to survive in the wild. Yes.
So I gather that usually a dolphin is stranding because it has a health problem. But is there any theory why that particular behavior follows the health problem? Like, is it something they do deliberately, or are they disoriented, or what brings them to the beach when they're sick?
She's asking why a dolphin would strand when it was sick. What would actually bring it to the beach itself? I think it's a combination of factors. One is that many times if they're suffering from a neurological impairment, it is disorientation. But second, most of the time, what we find is a secondary issue to many health problems is pneumonia. So they are not able to breathe and take in the air in their lungs that they need. So as air breathers, they simply just cannot maintain buoyancy to breathe air and end up on land, so they don't drown.
Heidi, do you track released animals after stranding? If so, is the data available to the public?
We do try to track released animals if possible. It's difficult. It's been a long time since we've been able to apply a satellite tag to a dolphin that was released, because most of the animals that we release are hurricane animals that are deemed healthy, that we're not attaching satellite tags to. We do attach like cattle ear tags, roto tags to them so that we would know if they ever came back in. The times when we have tracked an animal by satellite, we typically do make those available on the website, but it's been many years since we've done that.
What is the website?
It's dolphinrescue.org. Yes, in the back.
How are the major illnesses spread?
How are the major illnesses spread? It's really just like as mammals with us, air breathing, contact, if they have open lesions. It's really very similar to how we contract illnesses. And so that's why we're very careful when we're working with them, because we know that we can potentially contract what they have just by being around them, breathing.
Have you seen a correlation between El Nino years and the number of strandings?
We haven't at this point seen a relation to those El Nino years. We have started to see, though, this past year, which we're looking at, a decrease in strandings overall. So that's something that we're starting to look at. A trend is kind of going down over the past couple of years. We typically had about 150 strandings a year, and now we're kind of looking at between 100 and 120 that we're looking at a year, which is good. But we're trying to see if there's anything to that as far as weather and currents are concerned. Yes, sir.
Do those algal blooms down in like South London and all that be associated with climate change?
I don't know enough about that to comment on what their association is with El Nino. As far as the algal blooms are concerned with dolphins, it definitely could impact them. And when those blooms are detected by Texas Parks and Wildlife, we work with them to determine where those blooms are occurring. And then we are running those samples on those animals specifically for that rototoxin. Yes. Will the skeleton of the sei whale be recovered? We marked the location, and we would love to be able to recover at least the skull. It's very difficult to recover those types of bones, especially when they're in a water table like they are, and to recover them in good enough condition to rearticulate. But we, believe it's a historical event that happened. We do have many whales and dolphin artifacts and skulls, so we would like to add the sei whale to the collection if possible. So it may be something that we will go dig up later. We were very specific in our UPS coordinates marking those.
This past summer, we did see a tagged dolphin in I believe it was the Texas City Channel, wasn't it? Yeah. And, which I'd never seen before. If we see one, should we report it?
Yes, definitely. If you see a tagged dolphin, please report it to us, because it may even be a dolphin that we didn't release here on the Texas coast. It may be one that was released off of Louisiana or Arkansas, and it would be really interesting for them to, find where that animal ended up. I believe somebody has reported a dolphin a couple of times recently in Galveston Bay of a dolphin that has an orange or a red
Yes,
tag
it was
on
an orange one.
And so that may be one that we released, a young dolphin that had kind of lost its way up in the Sabine Lake area that we released with a red cattle ear roto tag on it. And it has a number on it. So if you're ever able to see one and get a photograph of it, I know they're difficult to take photos of, but if you can, that would be really helpful for us in tracking them.
Heidi, I have two related questions here. What percentage of live stranded animals are able to be successfully rehabilitated, and how many of the 10 live strandings from last year survived?
We had 1 of the 10 survive from last year, and I would say that's very typical for about 10% of all live strandings to survive.
Did you release it then, or?
That particular one is the one that's still in rehab with us, yeah.
And we have some more questions about that one. Do you think Zip will end up in an aquarium somewhere?
Zip is currently up for placement. National Marine Fisheries posts them for AZA and accredited associations and aquariums to apply for. And so they're very particular about the homes that they send these dolphins to, making sure that they have the right social structures. Like for this particular calf, it will be really important for him to have a mom figure wherever he goes, and for him to be integrated properly with the social structure that they have. So there's a questionnaire and applications that are filled out, submitted to National Marine Fisheries, and they make the final determination of where our dolphins will go.
Have there been any recent cases of strandings this year, especially with it being peak season?
Yes, we've had a number of dead strandings washing in, primarily on the Bolivar side. We've had, I think, 3 this week that have washed in, most in late stage decomposition. 2 were very young neonates, which looked like stillbirths from what we can tell. 1 was a very old, large animal. We also see a lot of old females washing in that we've seen in the last couple of weeks that look like they could potentially have died giving birth. And so it's coming off of calving season again, something that we see typically this time of year, and we are seeing our routine numbers or average numbers coming in right now still. Any other questions?
I see one
Is
here.
there any data on the number of dolphins in Florida now compared to the past?
Is there data on the number of dolphins that are stranding right now versus the past?
Stranding, just in general, the population.
Oh, the population. That's a really good question because we are working on that. So there really have not been any formal abundance estimates that have been conducted for bottlenose dolphins in Texas bays and estuaries and coastal animals. And so the Texas Marine Mammal Stranding Network has been working really hard to work and partner with National Marine Fisheries. And what we're doing is we've developed a systematic plan for the Texas coast to go to each bay, and we do photo identification. So we go out in a systematic way and do what they call mark recapture. And it's marking an animal, taking a photograph of its fin, and then trying to recapture that fin in a photograph so that we can determine where their movement patterns are. And we can also determine the abundance of dolphins, how many dolphins are inhabiting bays and coastal areas of the coast. And from that data, then they'll be able to develop a formal estimate of what the population is. Because as it stands right now, when we have die-off events, we can't necessarily say what the impact of the population is because we don't know how many are inhabiting those particular areas. So our goal, if we can get funding to continue doing it, right now we're working off of grants to do it, but if we can continue to work on that systematic phase, then we'll be able to hopefully develop abundance estimates for all of Texas bays and coastal areas for bottlenose dolphins.
Okay, I don't have any more questions online. Heidi, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
Before we wrap up for the evening, I'd like to remind you all that we have one more Seaside Chat next Wednesday, and the research vessel should be here, we're hoping. We also have a display of marine mammal artifacts on the back table that the Marine Mammal Stranding Network was kind enough to bring, and we'd be happy to talk to you about. And we have Ocean Discovery Day coming up at the NOAA facility here in Galveston on Saturday, March 12th. The Marine Mammal facility will be part of the open house. I don't know if you'll be able to go in based on whether they have a dolphin there or not, but they always participate and have some kind of activity for people to learn about how they handle marine mammal strandings. The turtle barns will be open that day for free tours, and lots of other activities going on the NOAA property. So keep us on your calendars for Saturday, March 12th as well.
So
Thank you.
next Wednesday, what's that
Next
one about?
Wednesday is going to be all about Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary and what we've been up to.
Fabulous.